Before we get into this, a sadly necessary disclaimer. Remember, just because I'm your ally doesn't mean I'm your bitch.
Now I know.
Knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe!
Poor old YouTube. They're really having a rough time of it lately, aren't they? Between media attacks on them on the one side, and then Jorgs Brav and IG Metall, one of the biggest labour unions in the world, the biggest in Germany, going after them as well. And now the LGBT community, on whose behalf, at least in part, they have been dicking over their own platform, have turned on them as well. Now, look, I'm a libertine. I am an extremely staunch free speech advocate. This often gets me into trouble because I stand up for the expression rights of people with whom I expressly disagree. And that would be putting it mildly. But I believe everyone has a right to put out whatever material they want. YouTube has a de facto monopoly over the vlogging space, the open access video space, whatever you want to call it. And so their house rules become essentially international rules about what you can broadcast, what you can monetize, all that, if broadcast is even the right word here. Now, over recent years, the right wing and conspiracy theorists and people who like sexy things and political commentators in general and social commentators in general, a lot of people, basically, starting with people who might be genuinely deplorable and then working its way down, have been affected by the changes at YouTube. The increased censorship, the increased use of bots and algorithms to spot and pick out troublesome words and phrases, to flag up that video, to demonetize it, to downlist it so it's not turning up in searches. Though my search is barely working at all on YouTube lately for some reason, and comments are all fucked up. Who knows why? They never tell us. But this rolling censorship, these knockdown issues that a lot of us have been going on about for a long time, particularly those of us who care about free speech, even for those we disagree. Yeah, we've been banging on about this for a while, and that it would inevitably backfire. And while there's been a few cases of this happening, it hasn't really come to a head until now. The LGBT community, which is the same community that's been clamouring for censorship for some time, is now launching a class action suit against YouTube for discrimination. Now, here's the problem, right? There's a legal get-out clause for YouTube here. They can say that we're not excluding you or downlisting you, delisting you, pushing you down in search results, demonetizing censor. We're not censoring you as an individual, as a person who happens to be LGBT. We are censoring and downlisting and demonetizing the content that you're producing that is LGBT oriented. This is a distinction that to many of us would seem to be without a difference, but it seems to be the excuse that they're going to use to justify their censorship and demonetization and so on of the LGBT community, and therefore may also, if successful, be the basis of their rationale behind censoring everyone else to whatever degree that they do, for swearing or sexy content or conservative content or far right content or far left content or whatever else the case might be. That might be how they go about it. We're not censoring you because of your political views. We're censoring your political views when they're expressed on this platform. So we're not discriminating against you, we're discriminating against the things that you say and you do. Like I say, to many of us this seems like a distinction without a difference, but the law is notoriously finicky about these sorts of things. Should LGBT YouTubers and so on be censored, demonetized, delisted? No, obviously not. And a lot of the excuses behind YouTube's attacks on right-wingers and so on, with whom I do not agree, but whom I believe have the right to express themselves. A lot of that's been based on the idea that YouTube and Google and Alphabet are all very progressive companies, and they want to ensure that YouTube is a safe place for LGBT people, trans people, racial minorities, whatever else. They want it to be for everybody. That's what they've often said. That's been the excuse for cracking down on everybody else. But it inevitably ends up with this, with the censorship of the people who were clamouring for censorship, who were asking for protection, who are asking for YouTube to be a safe space, because the people it's really intended to be a safe space for are advertisers. Understandably so, to an extent, because it's their money that drives everything else. It's their money that pays the YouTube creators. Unless that money's coming in via YouTube Red, of course, which, it's not hugely successful. A lot of advertisers get nervous about LGBT content. A lot of advertisers get nervous around sexual content of any type. So if you're producing educational content for LGBT people about LGBT sex, queer sex, whatever else, you're going to run into the same problems that I might have if I were to do a guide to BDSM or something on my channel, right? It's beyond the pale so far as advertisers are concerned, whether it's straight or gay or all points in between, right? So that's a big part of the problem. A lot of advertisers are also very nervous around LGBT content because it can be controversial, if not to them necessarily directly, then perhaps to their consumer base. Chick-fil-A, right? They probably wouldn't like one of their adverts, if they advertise on YouTube, appearing next to a video about pride or something, right? It doesn't jibe with their values, shall we say. So that's where we're having the problem. And also, I think, you were asking for people's videos to be censored if they were gender critical or whatever else, and believe me, TERFs are total wankers. But, whatever the feminine equivalent of wank is, friggers. A bunch of frigging wankers. There you go. TERFs are a bunch of frigging wankers. That covers all bases, I think, unless you've got some other peculiar artificial genitalia or something, but yeah. TERFs are frigging wankers. But if they're going to censor gender critical, LGBT critical, conservative voices that are critical of the LGBT community, right? How are they going to go about that? What is their algorithm going to learn if they teach it to ban critical content? They're going to teach it that transgender is a red flag word, that gay is a red flag word, that lesbian is a red flag word. Plus, these are terms that often turn up in pornography searches, you have to remember. So there's a reasonably good chance that it's going to turn up pornography when it looks for these kind of terms. So in going after whoever, the Poison Dwarf, Ben Shapiro, or what's his name with his mug club business, right? If it's being trained to go after them and to block their outrage at transgender bathrooms or whatever it might be, right? And they're tossers for doing so. I hate having to keep repeating myself, but otherwise people are going to take me out of context. What's it learning? It's learning that these terms are red flags. AI doesn't seem to be able to grasp context yet. This is a problem I run into when I do videos about depression, mental health, whatever else. I'm trying to help people. I don't necessarily want it to be monetized, but I monetize it so I can see whether they're demonetizing it, because that's a good guide to whether they're also pushing it down the search lists and so on. If I want to reach people with my depression, mental health, anti-suicide content, I run into problems because things like self-harm and so on, they ban, they don't want on the platform, and they're looking for it and they're red flagging anything that's risky, and a lot of companies don't necessarily want to be associated with that sort of content, except on their own terms, right? Like Bell Let's Talk or whatever else. So I try to help people, I get penalised for it. You try to help people, you try to educate people about LGBT stuff, you try to, best case scenario, spread tolerance, though there's a lot of hate coming from the LGBT community as well towards others. You're going to get delisted, you're going to get red flagged. And this was inevitable, right? Now, I expect a lot of people are just going to point and laugh at you now, because, you know, this is the future you chose, as the meme goes. The people probably still worth listening to in the anti-SJW space are the people who are going to be principled and say, no, they shouldn't be censored either, even though they've called for us to be censored. I don't want them to be censored, and I hope this legal battle works out for everybody. It's going to be an interesting, probably couple of years, given how slow the wheels of justice turn, between this and the labour dispute with the YouTubers Union. We might see YouTube reshaped. I think we've needed a pushback from the user base for a long time. But where Jorg's effort is universal and something that everyone should be able to subscribe to, this is much too tightly focused. But while it can't build a broad coalition, this is a hot button issue, one that the media will be interested in and could flip things around. And if they do manage to make some anti-censorship changes, if they manage to get YouTube to alter its behaviour, that could have a positive knock-on effect for the rest of us. So I wholeheartedly support this effort, but I wish it was a much broader anti-censorship, anti-demonetisation effort like Jorg is engaged in. Zang.